Welcome back to the Raising Our Vibration podcast, where we explore higher consciousness through spiritual practice. And today, Stephen and I are going to discuss meditation and cognitive function. Specifically, how does meditation boost cognitive function? And this was prompted by me listening to a wonderful talk by Ariel Garten, co-founder of Muse, and also then another talk this week by Sara Lazar, who's a neuroscientist and researcher on meditation. And I thought I'd just begin with a few highlights from both of them, kind of blended together into this whole series of ways that brain function is enhanced by meditation. And these really make a difference in our lives in terms of our memory, our stress reduction, our ability to focus our attention, our immune function, and so on. So I've made a list here of some of the highlights. I'm going to go through some of these, and we'll use this as a springboard. So number one was increased activity in the prefrontal cortex associated with what Lazar calls fluid intelligence. And she defines this as the ability to selectively attend to something, so selective attention and working memory, as well as meta-awareness. Meta-awareness being, I know where my attention is. I have a wider field of awareness that is able to say, oh, I'm focused on this and I'm not focused on that. So increased prefrontal cortex right here in the front center of the brain. And that's in charge of our executive functions. That's enhanced with meditation. Number two is a decrease in size and reactivity of the amygdala. So the amygdala is associated with reaction, fear, anxiety, and stress. So there is an increase of connection from the prefrontal cortex, the executive function, to the amygdala, but a dampening through that connection, a dampening of the activity of the amygdala. So we feel less stressed over a period of sustained meditation practice. Okay, the third one was increase in the activity and size of the insula. So deeper than the prefrontal cortex in the first frontal third of the brain is the insula, which is in charge of interoception and ability to track our thoughts, feelings, and inner sensations. So ability to track our inner world, especially in a sensory way. So why is that important? That's important because we are able to tune in to what's happening inside the body and begin to regulate our breathing, our level of stress, our level of how we react to the outside. And also, as we point out in subtle energy meditation, as you strengthen the insula and deepen your sensory awareness, being able to center into sensory awareness in itself has a quieting effect on the brain. Third was increase in gray matter and white matter in the brain. So gray matter you can think of as the processing hubs of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, and white matter is the connections between the different parts of the brain. So there's, as we just found, there's an increase in the prefrontal cortex and the insula, the gray matter areas, and also there's an increase in connectivity between the different centers of the brain. The next one is an increase in temporal-parietal lobe activation, and that has to do with our ability to take perspective, to have empathy with someone else, to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. So as that part of the brain that's associated with that has more connections and is more active, we have a greater capacity for empathy. And then finally, a dampening of the default mode network. The default mode network is associated with self-referential thought, so self-focus, rumination, worry, anxiety, those sort of states. So it has to do with an over-focus on the self. And that's called the default mode network. It's kind of in the back third middle of the brain. And there's an increase of alpha wave activity in that area. And that has a suppressing or a dampening effect on that default mode network. So, and I see that goes really well with this increase of empathy, right? We actually become able to put ourselves in another's shoes, and we are less focused on and ruminating on ourselves and our own thoughts. And so those were some of the key findings in research over the last 20 years or so in neuroscience that has really practical impact on how we experience our lives and how we work with our minds. So let's start there, Stephen, and talk about those things. And then we'll also get into the idea of brain coherence and synchrony and what that means in terms of meditation. So I'll pass it over to you to go from there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin, and love and blessings to all of you who are listening. So this is a discussion that I often have too with many scientists and neuroscientists is about this engaging the functions of the brain and actually what happens. And as you know, those of you who are listening, and I'm a great fan of Andrew Newberg's and also of the numerous people that he studied. So I'm going to make a reference to one of those studies here. But particularly when you look, Kevin, at these overall elements of meditation and what you've mentioned and the core details of what happens, especially moving into other states or what we might call mystical states or states of really deep meditative practice. One of the first things that tends to happen is that people experience in meditation a strong feeling, you could say. So, and you've already mentioned this, so I'm going to make reference to it again, is the limbic system itself, that in the brain, these shifts in experience that we have, such as, you feel this intensity or you feel this purity or the meditation, those of you who are listening may relate to the meditation experience feeling incredibly real, or you experience strong states of love, or you experience consciousness as infinite or God, or however you relate to that. And those kinds of experiences that are very intense are related to changes of activity in the limbic system. So that's and as you've discussed, Kevin, changes in the amygdala, because the amygdala does involve connections with the intensity of various experiences. So the limbic system first is really crucial. And I know that, in my own practice over the years, I have a tremendous amount of devotional kind of practice. I was brought up in those Christian mystical traditions, and then in Yogananda's traditions and the Tibetan Buddhist practices. They're all very involve a lot of devotion and dedication and love. So that being able to go into that part of the body where you feel openness or love or really deep connectedness or pleasure or ecstasy or whatever that is for you, and wherever that is, that does activate the limbic system and involves changes in activity in the limbic system. So that seems to be one of the fundamental shifts from a brain perspective, that it's often associated with changes in the limbic system. In terms of also just in the fact that if you don't enjoy meditating, then you're probably going to find it doesn't shift much of your day-to-day state. But if you have a real deep affinity with it, then it's going to activate and work with your brain. It'll start to connect with those neurons, those pathways that we like to groove when we actually do have an experience that we really deeply connect to. So that's the first thing. And then Second thing I wanted to relate to was this notion of clarity or reality in our meditative experiences, that as we meditate deeper and deeper, things get very clear. Excuse me. Some of the really basic things that we are open to, they become really, there's an element of really deep clarity. So now this part comes from involvement with the thalamus. So the thalamus itself is a key relay station in the brain for taking in information from the sensory organs and integrates it with many other areas of the cortex. So the thalamus actually helps us establish our perception of reality, and it it, it seems to be a key regulator in exactly how we perceive reality. So when reality suddenly when it becomes very clear, and we have this sense of really deep clarity that everything's so obvious, we meditate and it's really simple and clear, that's to do with thalamic activity. So I thought that was also that sense of clarity deriving from activity in the thalamus seems to be a really important part of the meditative practice. Now, and another part of this meditation in relation to the brain is the unity, the experience of unity. And this is usually when we experience everything as one, just one thing. The person's sense of self dissolves. And it feels like all things, including the self, dissolve into this oneness, and we no longer experience ourselves as being separate. Now, that aspect of dissolution into that unity experience seems to be related, as you've mentioned already, to the parietal lobe. So when there's a decreased activity in the parietal lobe, it reflects this opening to this dissolution of the self. So the parietal lobe seems to play an important part in these experiences of unity, because when they normally it functions where we take all the sensory information from the body, and this is where you and I in our courses constantly refer to the felt sense. So the parietal lobe, right, which is taking all that sensory information from our body to create a sense of self and also a three-dimensional representation of space. So it's actually constructing that. And when the input into that area of the brain decreases, then it no longer has any information to generate this sense of self and space. And it's precisely this loss of self and space that's described in these really deep meditative experiences. So I always thought that that's a really crucial point, this part that the parietal lobe plays in terms of us having that dropping away of self, that I know, many of our practitioners in our courses have asked us, well, how do we do that? How do we get there? And it's often to do with this sense of surrender, right? The sense of surrender, it's described in so many ancient traditions and so many religious traditions and so many spiritual traditions. And in fact, in the Islamic tradition, Islam itself means surrender to God. And I've always felt deeply into this, that the surrender to other, or surrender to something greater than ourselves, or surrender just to what is part of this really crucial shift that happens in the brain. And the notion of surrender itself, in terms of the brain, has to do with this, what you've also mentioned already, the frontal lobe activity. So when we have willful concentration, you'd mentioned that the frontal lobe activity does increase. When we have really strong exercises in concentration into absorption, which is again something we focus on in our courses, is these attention tasks, learning how and where to direct our attention. And the more that we concentrate on something, the more our frontal lobe activity increases, and because it's seeking to control and regulate the various brain processes that are involved. So the frontal lobe activity it happens when quite often we do chanting or we do something that activates our attention. It brings us right into an increased activity. But then during the intense meditative or prayerful experiences or really deep contemplation, what happens is that there's a point at which you're focusing with this really deep concentration into a sense of absorption, and you suddenly recognize at some point this feeling that it can no longer be sustained. You've kind of absorbed or surrendered your willingness to the actual process of the unfoldment of the focus of concentration itself. You kind of surrender to the concentration and you let it take its course. You actually become the quality that you're cultivating. So if you're cultivating love through a breath, for example, or compassionate awareness, then at a certain point of the concentration, this real tightness of that frontal lobe activity, there's a certain point where you actually surrender to it, and once you do that, the frontal lobe activity decreases, particularly the prefrontal cortex, and then there is a dropping away of this and an entering into these powerful flow experiences and spiritual experiences and potentially enlightenment itself. And so those shifts become really, really crucial. And so one of the cases that Andrew Newberg actually speaks about is in terms of the brain itself and how it relates to this shift into this non-dual awareness or into this non-self, or where the self itself dissolves. And he gives the example of a scholar, Jill Bolte Taylor, who in fact herself was a neuroscientist. And in her book, My Stroke of Insight, which is a beautiful book, she describes how she was in this process to become, a very well-known neuroscientist. And then in her 30s, she experienced a stroke. And the stroke was the result of a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. So the stroke substantially damaged the left-hand side of her brain. And during that stroke, she actually had a mystical experience in which she felt this intimate connection with all things in the universe. It's quite a very moving book, I can assure you. And she argues on the basis of her experience as well as her unique pathology. Because quite often, as we've often said in our courses, in the greatest tension or obstacles or challenges arises the greatest liberation or arises the greatest insights. And so she argues that because of this unique pathology which occurred on the left side of her brain, which is her scientific side, and I know we're going to go into coherence and synchrony, so this is probably a good segue, is that her really strong scientific approach to conceptual reality, to subject-object-based reality, had been preventing the right side of her brain from expressing these deep feelings of unity and connectedness and intuitiveness. And the stroke, which damaged the left-hand side of her brain, actually released the right-hand side so that she was able to have these powerful mystical experiences, and that this enlightenment or this mystical practice or these deep meditative experiences always exist within our brains, that they're always present. This was her also hypothesis, that they'd always been there, and it was a matter of just simply releasing them. And her basic, thesis around this was simply that when we look at our society and we look at the way that we kind of relate to all the things that go on, we're mostly operating in this subject-object based reality. We're focused on consumerism. We're bogged down in the details of life and in the materialism and consumerism of society. We get pulled in by a television. We get pulled in by movies. We get pulled in by social media. And that the mystical or enlightening or radiant part of ourselves, the clear part of ourselves, that actually is always there. That's always underlying everything. This pure, indivisible, boundless aspect of ourselves, the part that's limitless, is actually, we lose, as we grow up, we lose the ability to connect with it intimately, because we're so locked down into getting a job, finding relationships, earning money, doing this, doing that, and doing everything else, and we're still doing it as adults. And that we get her, hypothesis was simply that it can sometimes take an aha moment or a shock, like as she had, or these really deep meditative practices, to unlock the areas of the brain that already exist and their functions. So she likened it to a video game, that when you need a certain score to go to the next level, and so on, to unlock the next level of the character. So because in the sense, the whole areas of the brain that we need to access are already there. We just simply seem to have lost that ability to connect with it.
Right. When they're already there, and they're always active, right? Correct. They're always at some level of our consciousness, of our brains. That's always happening, right? Exactly. So, in all great mystical traditions, it's discovering what's already there, right? The unity that's already there, the consciousness of that unity that's already there. But we have, as you said, so much conceptual information processing going on that we can't get through that. We can't let go of that, right? That's the biggest thing. We can't, and that's really kind of the crux of this deep surrender and letting go and meditation, is where our brains are so used to responding to every little bit of input. How often does your phone ding and you just go right to it, and then you go to the next thing, and then you get back to your work, and then you're called again to this, and where our lives are so full of information and responding to conceptual information that there's no space, there's no time, there's no opportunity for us to, and no inclination and no ability to let go of that, because this seems so interesting, while it's stressing us out and wearing out our immune system and creating chaos in our world. Yet it's so compelling. We're addicted to it. It's really an addiction. Right.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely, Kev. And when you consider it, I'm taken back to some of the ancient stories that you and I know so well. So, for example, Sri Singh, who was Padmasambhava's teacher in the ancient Tibetan traditions. When people often are in awe of, Sri Singh met Padmasambhava, and Sri Singh just did this one pointing out about the open sky, and instantly, Padmasambhava was liberated. Now, you could actually, in terms of what we're discussing, you could say Padmasambhava was exactly at that simple point where he was totally open. He didn't have all the assault of modern technology and all our education system, because when you think about it, we are drilled from the day that we enter our education system as children to perceive the world in a particular way. Meditation and openness and allowing and surrender is not a common quality that's taught in
right. We're just trying to keep up with all this information processing and tasks, right? We're just we can never get it done, and we don't take a break from it because we feel like we're going to get behind, and we're not. It's
right. We have that running through our brains are functioning on that, whether we really know that or not. That's how our brains are. Those are the little neuron pathways that we're directing our brain to follow. Oh yeah, we've got to follow this news, or we've got to keep up with this information in our career, or we've got to do this, or we've got to do that. And our brains are constantly getting that message. Oh, you need to be doing this. You've got to, so people go to bed. So many people come visit me and say, I can't go to sleep at night, or I'm filled with anxiety, or I've got, so
there's a brain chemistry associated with it too, right? You're getting little hits of brain chemicals that each time you attend to a new piece of information, and then you want more because it doesn't last and wears off, and then you need another one. And right.
Yeah.
No wonder the world is so stressed out.
Yeah, exactly. And there's that beautiful, we did the podcast yesterday with the wonderful hosts of Uncorked. and Holly and Gina. And as they pointed out, they could feel at the moment of just simply stopping and feeling peace. Oh,
Yeah.
look what's present. And I think that's so...
And tears started to flow.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it was so
It's just
moving.
such
It
a
was so
relief.
beautiful. Such a relief.
It's like, oh, I just have a moment of break from that.
Mm.
And then this emotion just starts flowing
because,
I don't have to do that every moment. Right.
Totally, Kevin. That's, at the heart of most of the people that come to our courses, or most of the people that come and visit me in private sessions, are coming to find relief from, because they're just not sure that the pathways in the brain have been drilled so strongly that you don't even know where to turn. I mean, I likened it a bit in that podcast to watching a movie, that when you think that we can spend 2 hours on a movie no trouble, and yet we don't really spend 2 hours on meditation. So therefore we are constantly being pulled, whether we know it or not. We are so conditioned, as Krishnamurti would say, to that object-based. We're constantly pulled out, and then we go to sleep at night and our dreams are full of all sorts of anxiety. so that's simply because our brains are grooving that network. They're saying, oh, okay, this is what you want. I'm going to simply give back to you what you want. So if you supply the brain with lots of opportunity for openness and peace and allowing and space, it's going to also give you those kinds of responses once it starts to groove those kinds of pathways.
And initially people might think, oh, nothing's happening. I'm bored. I'm agitated. I'm irritated. Right. And because the mind is used to this chemical, these chemical hits and these bits of information and so on. But there's, if we just sit with that and allow that, yes, that's what we're grooved to. It's okay. This is how the brain has been grooved to function. And let's just allow that to go on while we tune into a different level of sensory awareness. So, and then the brain will come on and try to do that thing. And we just say, that's okay. Yeah, that can go on. But in this moment, I'm just going to tune into this inner sensory present moment awareness of feeling my body, feeling the breath, and letting go, and simply being present. And there's a crossover point there, right? Where all of a sudden it's just like, right? There's a letdown, and there's a relief, and there's an ease. And a lot of people think of meditation as hard because it's being approached in that subject-object way where I'm trying to concentrate, I'm trying to quiet my mind, I'm approaching it from the way that I approach everything else in life, which is this effort and so on. And it really takes some untraining just to say, you know what, I can let go of that effort and I can just be aware of what is here and now. I can feel my feet on the ground. I can soften my hands. I can take a deep breath. Just have a moment of space. And there's a whole different part of the brain that's active in that, right? This center of the brain, the brain stem and the limbic brain that's associated in the insula, that's associated with this sensory awareness, this present moment, here now, sensory awareness. If we just dip into that and feel and sense, we don't have to try to make anything happen. Just as we feel sensations in our feet and our toes and our fingers and our bodies and our breathing, as we start to feel that, then the thinking mind just kind of recedes to the background, right? We're not trying to stop. We're not trying to quiet the mind. The mind is just attending to something else, right? And as the mind attends in this sensory way, something different happens, like this core hub of the brain where these theta brain waves are resonating. That starts to just work its way out into the whole brain. So the whole brain just starts to have this nice, slower, calmer, easy rhythm that's just natural. It's always happening, right? The center of the brain is always operating in that way, but we're just giving ourselves a moment to tune into that. And it does take some acclimating to it, right? Because we're so used to this other activity. But it very quickly, if we just give ourselves a little bit of opportunity each day to tune into that, very quickly the mind and the body and feel good when we're attending to this, right? So it's the body says, oh yes, that's what I've been wanting. I thought I was wanting all these things out there, but actually this is what I've been wanting all along. There's a deep peace here that's ever present and available. This is what I want.
I think there's what you were saying about acclimating our awareness to this is that, we often talk about in the courses about getting up first thing in the morning and simply resting as that space of peace and doing this last thing at night. That really helps anchor points during your day. And I know, one of the curious things I note often for people who I'm teaching or instructing, and just like you, is that when we're so used to being in our heads, and so when you go, the first thing you go to, as you said, is you go to a notice on your phone, you go to somebody's opinion, and so you actually come here, you notice that people come up into their heads, their eyes look up and around, and they're really trying to refer to, and that you've dropped into an object-based awareness. So I often find it helpful for people to find where they feel that peace in their body and put their hand on that to remind them, because it's very easy to get up in the morning and also just you're still on automatic and you still reach for your phone, or you've got something urgent to do, or you've got a list but if you just come back into the simple felt experience, which is what we emphasize, and just the first thing you do is you place your hand on that part of your body where you feel that peace. Could be your belly, could be your heart, and you just simply rest as that, just for that 60 seconds. It's something so beautiful. You can actually feel it if you try that now, if you're listening or if you're watching this. If you find the part of your body, find the part of the body which is most open or feels this peace or this love, whatever it means to you, wherever you feel it, find it in your body, locate it, bring your hand there, place your hand in that, and just rest. As that for these 60 seconds. And if your mind gets distracted, that's okay. Just bring it back to this really simple space of peace, place of peace in the felt sensation of the body. Yeah, it's real simple.
And that tactile touching of the body makes such a difference, right? That's awakening that tactile sensory awareness and self-soothing, self-calming. It's immediate, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend yesterday who described her agitated self like a scratchy cat.
Mm.
And so I said, what would the cat need to feel calm? And she said, well, of course, you stroke a cat, right? And I said, well, yeah, well, where's the cat in your body? And she said, oh, it's always in my heart. It's always, my heart gets so scratchy. So I said, what if you soothe that scratchy cat? So she just did that. And she said, oh, feel it. Oh, that cat likes it. You know. So sometimes you're right. That beautiful self-compassion and self-nurturing that's actually open all the time. It's like, you know, open all hours. It's we sometimes forget because, you know, when things happen, things impact us, scratchy things, to use that analogy, is that we quite often, you know, we blame or we say, oh, it's because of that person, or my neighbor did this, or my friend or my family is irritating me. And then you forget, because the moment you do that, you're actually already clawing, to use that cat analogy, for out of things, right? In fact, the very source of that scratchiness is right wherever it is in your body, and it can be simply soothed just by resting in it and allowing it to be present. That's the other thing, right? We often push down those scratchy cats.
Right.
But
So first thing is to tune in and be aware of that scratchy cat, right? And just let it be there. Just, it's okay. Acknowledge it, be present with it, have that openness and that kindness toward it. And that, just changing that relationship to it from pushing it down or pushing it away to opening to it and welcoming and accepting it and tuning into it in a real tactile, sensory way, and then soothing it in that real tactile, sensory way that lights up the center of the brain, right? That soothing, positive feeling and ease lights up the center of the brain and helps, as we tune into that feeling, the rest of the brain just kind of lets go and quiets down.
right.
And so what difference would it make if everyone took that first moment of the day to engage in that tuning in, that self-soothing, that before reaching for the phone, before getting on emails and texts and chats and so on, just have that be the opening to the day. And I think we'd change our world.
I think we would.
That's a good place to stop, and maybe we'll talk about coherence and synchrony next time.
And next time, sounds. I was thinking about that too. It feels very resonant to do that, Kevin. So thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you all for watching, and thank you for your practice. We'll see you here next week, same time, same place. And if you're interested in more information on subtle energy meditation and the Raising Our Vibration book and app and Facebook community, you can go to raisingourvibration.net. So bye for now.